everybody always asks, so how did you know? That was a big thing, was realizing this is why I left Google to go work for a church. I get this question so much. I usually just share with people who ask, who know about my story a bit, but I've always wanted to share the full story on here because I know there's so many people who are trying to make career decisions, trying to be like, should I quit my job? Should I leave? What should I do? You know, I don't want to make a foolish decision, but I also want to live by faith if God is calling me, but how do I know? And there's just so many questions. So I just hope that my story will just give you some insights and food for thought, because I learned a lot from it, and I look back and I'm like, wow, God really, really knew what he was doing, even though I didn't. I'm gonna start by saying I got a job at Google right out of college. That's a whole nother testimony for another time. I didn't even apply for it, but I ended up working at Google, and I knew, okay, this is really, really important, because when I was waiting for the final offer decision, if they were gonna accept or reject me after the final round, I had just like this strong sense that God highlighted to me the story of Abraham. If you're not familiar, God asked Abraham to give up and sacrifice his son Isaac, whom he had waited a long time for. Like, he was like 100 years old when Isaac finally came along. It was his only son, and that was God's promise to him, that he would give him a son, he would give him generations, bless his generations, and they would become great nations. But this whole time Abraham was like, how is that going to happen when my wife is barren? Like, she hasn't had any kids, and she hasn't able to have any kids, and she's old now. So when God asked Abraham to sacrifice his son Isaac, Abraham just responds with so much faith. This is what is counted to him as righteousness. It says in Hebrews that he just like obeyed God and didn't push back, didn't say like, God, how dare you like give me Isaac and now you're taking him, whatever. He just like goes, he rises early in the morning, goes to the mountain ready to obey God in this. And that is just so crazy. I remember that story just standing out to me, and the timing of it being really like correlated with my interview process with Google, and just having again this strong sense that God was like, this is like an Isaac. Like, if I give you this job, it's not yours to hold on to. And I remember distinctly telling myself, what God gives, he can also take away, and it's not what defines me. It's not something I will hold on to with tight fists. Like, I need to be able to give it up when or if he asks me to. Fast forward about 4 years, you know, I've worked in different departments and teams at Google. I'm in this team now at the peak of the pandemic when things were really crazy. Everybody was like running amok, like, what is this virus? Around springtime of 2020, and I was in brand marketing too. So we were like constantly stressed about how do we respond to these new things happening in the world. Like, everything was in flux and turmoil. And up to that point, I actually had a lot of clarity and peace and just like full conviction. And I saw fruit proving that God really did call me there to be on mission for him, to be a minister, to connect believers. And I loved helping to grow the Christian fellowship at Google. Yeah, it was just like really, really awesome to learn how to fuse and live out my faith and work together. And there were so many challenging times, of course, but up to that point, I felt a lot of peace and purpose and clarity around that. But around that time of around spring 2020, I started to feel, this is what some people have said in the past, but I didn't understand when they said it until that started happening. God's grace was kind of being lifted from that situation of me being at Google. And it's hard to explain how it feels. It just felt more like I was pushing the boulder uphill. Not that like if things get hard, you should always like run away or change your situation, but it's more like there are times when you can be going through a storm, but you still know God has placed you there and this makes sense, versus that storm, many storms that I was going through at that time, I started to question, like, I don't know anymore if I'm actually supposed to be here, but I don't want to jump ship just because it's hard. You know, I want to follow God's direction. Where would I go if I left? I don't know what I would do. And I just didn't have clarity or peace about that. But I also didn't have total peace about staying necessarily. So I started kind of thinking, like, is God like shifting me? I don't know. Is he trying to signal to me that I'm supposed to go somewhere? So I started like considering that in the back of my mind, but I didn't really entertain it too much because, again, I didn't want to jump ship. I really did feel like, okay, if there's like all this darkness and turmoil, like I know know I'm supposed to be a light as a believer. I'm supposed to be an ambassador of Christ. I want to be intentional and present as much as possible and bless the people around me and try to help them, and try to be a light in the darkness to influence the culture around me. Fast forward more into closer to summer is approaching. Because of the pandemic, my church that I was a part of, which is like this multi-site church in the Bay Area, they actually started this effort connecting people who needed help with people who wanted to help. Because at that point, everybody was like asking, oh, how can we help people in need and what can we do? People wanted to do something. So they created this platform and I thought it was great. I forgot how I found out, but I heard that they needed help with marketing and I was like, I've spent my career in marketing. Like I love marketing. I guess I can help out and just volunteer on the side. And I ended up loving doing that work. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is so fulfilling. It's aligned with my beliefs and values. I love the people. That was something that really struck me, was the leadership and the culture of the people and the teams. It was like night and day compared to my work life where I was experiencing a lot of toxicity, questionable culture, things that were just like not being modeled correctly, including in leadership. I was like, wow, this is day and night, and I did not know that this kind of leadership was possible. I was really drawn and impressed by that. And then this really surprised me was pretty quickly the pastor who was directing the efforts, he also has a background in corporate and tech, and I really, really respect him as a person. And he basically came to me and asked me, hey, have you ever considered going into full-time ministry? Now, this is interesting because rewind a bit. Before I started my job at Google, I actually did a ministry internship the summer after I graduated. It was a great internship and great experience that I had. My takeaway was I just had this feeling that God, he sent me to Google to learn skills that someday he would want me to use for full-time ministry in like a ministry or a church or some kind of like faith-based organization. I just didn't know where or what, but I just kind of had that inkling inside of me and I was like, okay, I'll just like, store that for later, I guess. But I was thinking that would happen maybe when I'm like retired, like maybe after I had like a long career in corporate or something. But when he asked me that question, it just brought me back that flashback. My first reaction was like, haha, like didn't know how to respond. But I had that memory and I realized he's not laughing. Oh, he's serious. And yeah, I just spent many weeks, if not months, asking him questions, asking what the people's experience was being on staff, and asking other believers that I knew, just seeking counsel and wisdom and all the things. Like I was praying, I was like seeking God. I was so torn because I just didn't want to leave Google because I was going through like hard things and stressful things, but I also was like, this could be God. Like this could be God leading me towards that direction. And at the end of the day, this is what everybody always asks is like, so how did you know? And I will say I did not have 100% clarity. God did not give me a burning bush sign. In fact, I got a lot of competing opinions from people that I really respected and was friends with, but they all said all different things. It's kind of like when you flip a coin, like when you're like, oh, if it's heads, I'll do this. If it's tails, when I do this. And then you flip it, you get heads, and then you're like, oh, dang, I actually wanted tails. Like that's when you actually kind of realize what's inside. And I remember those moments when I would be talking to people and they would give me suggestions like, oh, maybe you can do part-time Google, part-time working at this church, and all these other solutions to get me to stay at Google. I remember feeling a sense of, no, like that's not it. Deep down, I was like, I think God really is wanting me to take this leap of faith, even though it's scary, because I would be cutting my pay by so much, no benefits of Google anymore, and no like prestige or title or safety net in terms of career. And I even spiraled to the point of like thinking, am I gonna ruin my kids' lives by not being able to afford like paying for their college tuition or all these things that God really had to reveal to me in the process of this. Like all my underlying fears were basically revealing that I was trusting a certain system and traditional way of doing things of like, oh, make sure they go to a good college that is going to be expensive, but that's the key to success. And like all these things that I was like, oh my gosh, I need to trust God more than my ability or my own wisdom and my own logic. Yeah, I was just like going through all these conflicting thoughts. And then Alex, my now husband, at the time we were still just dating, he really, really helped me by just saying, just telling me and reassuring me, you already know. He didn't tell me yes or no. He just reinstilled in me my own confidence in my ability to discern and to hear from God, especially what he was doing in my heart and my soul. And I just had to tune out all the other noise and all the other like competing voices and doubts and questions and beliefs. I just had to really go back to what am I actually like sensing from God? Okay, worst case, I go work at this church. I hate it. I can always pivot back to the corporate realm, I guess, versus wonder what if. That is one thing I just cannot live with, is the what if hanging over my head, like the regret of not trying and seeing, especially knowing that there's a very high possibility this is God wanting me to do something. And if I say no because of fear, I am not going to be able to have peace. That was a big thing for me, was realizing, yeah, the only reason I would say no, really at the end of the day, if I'm honest with myself, is out of fear, wanting to protect myself out of golden handcuffs. And that is what brought me back again to the whole Isaac Abraham thing, where I was like, oh my gosh, I promised God, I promised myself that this job would be an Isaac, that I would fully surrender and let go. If the only reason I'm saying no to this opportunity is because I lost that quality and I'm actually now like idolizing and holding on to this out of fear, that is not good. Like, I want to be living by faith. I want to be living in alignment with God. I want my life and my decisions to really please God. So even if I'm doing this out of faith and it ends up things go wrong, like at least like I know God would be happy with me that I stepped out in faith. I finally made that decision. The second hardest part was telling my manager, but surprisingly she already had that feeling that I was going to tell her. I will say that during the last weeks and even days of my time at Google, I definitely was getting cold feet. I was like, what have I done? This feels so surreal. Did I just make a mistake? I was just like doubting and questioning, like, oh my gosh, did I do the right thing? You know, so if you are afraid of that or experiencing that yourself, that is totally normal. Like, so many people go through that. I think most people do. But yeah, on the other end of it, I just came out just like, wow, this feels right. This is what God is wanting to call me into now in this next season and assignment. And sure enough, there definitely was a very specific purpose and intention. God did that, which I'll share more in the future. But yeah, it was just so up and down, and definitely one of the hardest decisions I've had to make in my life, but I do not regret any of it. The other part that's kind of funny is when I started sharing with people on the team and tangential teams, there were basically two common responses. One was, oh wow, good for you, like taking it easier. Like basically like implying like, you know, working for a church is gonna be easier than the stress bubble that we're all in the corporate realm. But the reality is, full-time ministry, it is not easier compared to working in corporate. It's easier in certain ways, but it's definitely a lot harder in other ways as well, which I can break down and share more of in the future. But the other common response that I was also surprised to get was people just like expressing admiration and even like low-key jealousy, like a nice jealousy of like, wow, I wish I could do that. You know, I have a dream of working for a nonprofit. Just saying like, great for you. Like, that's awesome and so inspiring of you to do that. And I just remember replying like, you can do it. It just takes the courage. And I think faith has a large part of that, right? Because if you don't believe that there's a God who loves you, who cares for you, who will provide for you and take care of you, and who also is calling you to something, then of course, yeah, it's so easy to be stuck in fear and not take risks, to always stay on the safe path. But I think, you know, when you really want to live by faith, it is risk. Faith and risk go hand in hand. It's not that you do things recklessly without thinking and without praying, of course, and without wisdom, but you need to look inside yourself to evaluate, where is your heart at? Why are you doing what you're doing or not doing what you're doing? Because the why is what matters to God much more than actually the what. Like, you could be doing all the right things for the wrong reasons, but you could also be doing quote unquote wrong things for the right reasons. And it's actually better to have right reasons, because God can redeem those wrong things. God can always, you know, he's got you. His grace is enough. He will carry you through hard times, mistakes, blah, blah, blah. But what he cares about most is your heart of faith. Like, do you trust him enough to obey imperfectly, or are you stuck being paralyzed by this need of perfection and needing to get everything right according to your own understanding? I'm always encouraged by that verse, Proverbs 3:5-6. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways, acknowledge him, and he will make your paths straight. And this verse is just so key. I come come back to it so often in my life. And every time, over the years, it just proves to be more and more true. Like the more I try to lean and like depend on my own understanding of things, the more confused and clueless and stuck I am. But the more I invite God, I acknowledge, I say, God, you are so much greater than me. You know what is best for me and this situation and what will fulfill your greater purposes. So I want to acknowledge and bring this to you and invite you into it and submit to you. And when you really like trust him, he always comes through in the most amazing ways. And so yeah, sure enough, I end up joining this church organization. It was such an amazing experience, so invaluable. I grew exponentially in my confidence and my leadership, wisdom, like in so many ways, as well as all the things I experienced, the ups and the downs. I would always tell people, like, I feel like I grew more in 1 year working there than I did 4 years at Google. It was just so amazing to see great, healthy models of leadership when I had been honestly jaded by a lot of broken examples of hypocritical leadership before. I do not regret it at all. God really grew me and shaped me and strengthened my faith as well through the whole process and provided in so many ways as well. Funny enough, the timing happened to be, this was not planned. My now husband Alex didn't know that this would happen when he started planning his proposal to me. So we got engaged literally the weekend between when I left Google and started my new job at the church. That weekend we got engaged. It was such an amazing day. We were just over the moon, so happy, could not wipe the smiles off our face all night. It was just such a perfect divider between the two. But then also because I started working for the church and they were doing this like online church for a bit, but then they transitioned to do like a hybrid model of like in-person services and online because of changing pandemic policies in the county. We actually, through the church, got to learn resources and tools and people to help put on a hybrid wedding by the end of the year. So yeah, it was just so crazy how everything worked out, because I don't think if I had joined staff and gotten to know all the people and how they did things, I don't think we would be able to pull off or know how to pull off a hybrid wedding. And that just ended up being like the perfect situation for us, because we wanted to include people from far away, but also wanted to respect the guidelines and also have like an in-person element as well. So anyway, it just all worked out so well in terms of that as well. All the things I had feared just were nonsensical and irrational. And really, at the end of the day, the best treasure, honestly, is just seeing God's faithfulness and experiencing his presence and his pleasure over me, knowing that I did what I did out of faith and not fear. And so if you're in a spot where you're like, I don't know what to do, I'm torn about my career decision, should I move, should I not, should I leave this job, or what should I do? I would just say, really take it to God. Like, he is the one who knows. You can ask people for advice, of course. There's wisdom in the counsel of many, but there's also confusion in the counsel of too many, especially if they're all competing voices. You want to make sure you're asking godly, God-fearing people, ideally years ahead of you, who have life experience to share, of course, but everyone's biased inevitably. And at the end of the day, the best person to go to is God, because he is the one whose thoughts are higher, his ways are better. And the more you try to rationalize something, the more it's easier to just live by your flesh, by what you think is right and what people tell you to do. But the whole point of this life, why we're here on earth, is to experience God's glory and goodness and love through taking steps of faith, seeing how he comes through, sharing that with people. And the more we grow in our understanding of that, the more we become powerful vessels to minister to others with that same truth and hope. I hope this all makes sense. I kind of just rambled, but I just really wanted to share. You never know how these things can speak to people. So let me know if you resonate with anything in this in the comments below, and make sure to like and subscribe. I will be posting more testimonies that I have just been storing in my heart and feeling like I'm gonna have like spiritual constipation because I need to share it out with the world. So now is the time, and I'm so excited to just share more with you all about how good God really is, and to stoke your faith and help you navigate all these real life tensions through God's lens, according to his design and according to who he is and who you are in him. I'll see you guys next time.